TMT, how's it going, my friend? I'm doing well, thanks. How are you on this fine Thursday evening? To my two people in the chat, how are we doing? Let's get this chat room alive. We start some boxing discussion. Doesn't usually take this long to get going. Or maybe I've caught people on a busy day. Hey, Freakin'. I'm good, my friend. How are you? I don't recognize your name. I'm assuming you're a new subscriber. Is that the case? Okay, so you subscribed for a couple of months after the AJ Usyk fight. Okay, okay. So you've been part of the channel for a while. It's good. Got a somewhat loyal following then. Okay. Well, thanks for being here. Hopefully, we get a few more people in this live stream. We can talk some boxing. You probably see by the title, plan to talk about Conor Benn versus Eubank Jr., Garcia versus Fortuna, and Deontay Wilder and his potential return. Those are the top topics. But then, of course, anything you guys want to talk about, just drop it in the chat, and I'll answer as best as I can. So, TMT getting us started. Happy to hear your views about Benn Eubank. I find this matchup utterly scandalous, personally. Yeah. See, I did a quick video a couple of days ago about Benn's options. Just quickly, yes, G-Man, how you doing, my friend? Good to have you here. Don't know if you see my message yet, but if you want to jump on as well, just let me know and I'll send you over a link. But yeah, it's a little bit dead right now, so if you want to hold on until it's popping off a bit more, that's fine. Just I've got my element open, so whenever you want to jump in. Pound for pound boxing, yes, sir. Mr. Pound for pound boxing, I think, has a 100% attendance, which is amazing. The loyalty, it's just unparalleled. So big up to you every time, my friend. But yeah, TMT, your question about Benn Eubank. As I said, I did a video a couple of days ago exploring Benn's options, and I was under the impression, like most people, I think, that the Eubank Jr. fight was not really a viable option, because IFL TV uploaded that video of Benn and Eddie Hearn at Pulev Chisora 2, and they essentially dismissed it. They said, it's on the horizon, in terms of down the line, but right now it's just not. It's not an option. That's what I gathered from what they said. But then you have Mr. Gareth Davies, who, you have to take what he says with a pinch of salt, but he seems to be insisting that the fight is signed. So it's a little bit of a head scratcher, because if the fight was announced tomorrow, I wouldn't be particularly surprised. Strange things happen in boxing, but the matchup itself. Oh, one thing I forgot to add is Eddie Hearn. I saw a video, I think it was uploaded by DAZN, and Eddie Hearn's talking about, there's a big announcement coming. So you know how Eddie Hearn likes to say, there's always a big announcement. There's always a big announcement, and then he announces some match between, I don't know, Felix Cash fighting for the WBA Super Duper belt, against some road sweeper. That's Eddie Hearn's idea of a big announcement. But he did upload a video, which kind of, I don't know, in my opinion, maybe it's not just a rumor. Maybe there is some substance to this, but I guess we'll find out in due course. But the fight itself, I think it's a silly fight. I think in this point in time, it's a bit stupid. It's kind of not stupid, but it's just silly. It's just there's no real rhyme or reason for it. And obviously, the Benn Eubank Benn rivalry is historic, and I guess it's got some financial mileage in it, to if it's sold the right way. But it's Hatman really put it best, and I think I said it in my video as well. It's not like Conor Benn is the top dog at welterweight and he's a champion and he's a big welterweight, and he just needs a challenge, so he's jumping up to middleweight to fight Eubank Jr. That's not the case. You have a fighter in Conor Benn who is a welterweight, is a small welterweight, and isn't even the best at welterweight, going up against Eubank Jr., who still in his career has really achieved nothing of note. the WBA interim belt, the IBO. Neither of them, or let me say, Eubank Jr. is yet to have like a real, true career-defining win, in my opinion. And then Conor Benn, he's on the ascent. He's finding his feet and starting to establish himself as a bit of a contender. So there's not really much on the line other than some, I don't know, inherited glory, if you want, from there. Obviously, winning a fight is good, but the rivalry isn't necessarily theirs; it's their dad's. So yeah, it's yeah. I wouldn't go as far as saying scandalous. I would just say silly, personally. But that's just my opinion. I'd still tune in. Don't get me wrong. I'd still watch the fight. But Hatman really put it best when he said that it's a lose-lose for Eubank Jr. and it's a win-win for Conor Benn, because if Conor Benn goes in there and gets blown away, well, that's okay. Oh, he's a small welterweight. He shouldn't have been in there in the first place. Like, you can't be too hard on him. But even if he, pieces up Eubank Jr. and catches him with a few shots, makes him, knocks some sweat off his head, that looks good, But then on the flip side, Eubank Jr., if he blasts away Conor Benn, he's supposed to. If he looks bad, oh dear, that's not a good sign. If he loses, could you imagine that? So Eubank Jr. really doesn't have anything to gain, and I can't imagine the payday from that fight is going to be that much higher than some of his previous paydays. Maybe I stand corrected on that, but yeah, it's a strange one. That one's a real head scratcher. TMT, win for Benn, win for Benn, except if he ends like Brooke. Fighters are not superiors. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But obviously, that's the same scenario in a welterweight going up to fight middleweight. Brooke did it with Golovkin. Benn may do it with Eubank Jr. But Golovkin and Eubank Jr., there's a big difference. Golovkin is an offensive powerhouse, and Eubank Jr. is quite offensive. He's quite dynamic in his own right, but I wouldn't say he's not the kind of fighter that is going to really, really damage you like a Golovkin. Obviously, there are some exceptions. Nick Blackwell will probably disagree with me, but for the most part, going in against Golovkin, I feel like you're much more likely to have 7 bells knocked out of you than if you went in with Chris Eubank Jr. So, Mr. Relax, good to have you here, my friend, as always. Hey, Outmatch. What happens to boxers like Mark Damori, lost to David Haye, and then KO's 10 journeymen in a row? They can't be getting paid a lot, surely. Well, to be honest, no. They don't get paid a lot, but then they make up for it by fighting regularly. If you look at some of the journeymen in the British circuit, obviously that's what I'm familiar with. I'm sure there's probably some similarity with the American circuit too. But if you look at kind of entry-level professional boxing, I want to say, you will find that the journeymen, they're fighting pretty much every weekend. They will do consecutive Saturdays, probably getting paid a couple of £100, 300, thereabouts, maybe more, maybe less, depends who they're fighting against, usually a prospect. So how well has the prospect been marketed, whatever. So yeah, that's not really surprising. You get journeymen that fight amongst each other, but I find that seems to be quite rare. You might have a journeyman who fights a prospect. That prospect turns out to not be so good, becomes a journeyman himself, and then he kind of becomes like a test sometimes for young up and coming fighters. But yeah, for the most part, fighters like Mark Damori, they don't fight a particularly high level, but they fight more often. And one thing that a lot of people don't talk about is the semi-professional, the semi-professional boxing. I don't want to call it a league or a rank, because You know, obviously it's unregulated, but you can make decent amount of money fighting semi-pro. You won't ever achieve anything, nothing major in like the mainstream boxing, but you'll be active and you'll. Sorry, my flip flops squeaking. But you'll be active and you'll be earning decent money, you know, compared to the average Joe. You know, you have your 9 to 5 and you box on the side. But yeah, there are loads of people in boxing, and most of them you never hear about. Chris V. Hello, Chris V. How you doing, my friend? Hi, Outmatch. Excuse me. Hi, Outmatch. I think Conor will win. A couple months back, Chris Andre made a video about Conor's aggressive style, which causes others to make errors, and I always noticed that too. Benn on points, in my opinion. Oh, that's bold. That's a very brave prediction, I have to say. If they were the same size, I maybe, just maybe, from a stylistic point of view, I might just give Conor Benn the edge. However, I've seen both of these guys in person, and I've been like up close, and I've seen them up close and personal, and they are just on completely opposite ends of the spectrum. Conor Benn is a small welterweight. Chris Eubank Jr. is a fairly big middleweight. I don't think people understand how big the gap in size is. That being said, I'm from a technical point of view, I'm actually more impressed with Conor Benn. I feel like he's got a bit more versatility. I suspect that just based on performances, he may be a bigger, you know, talking in a pound for pound sense, he may be a bigger puncher pound for pound than Eubank Jr. Obviously, Eubank Jr. has got amazing combinations. He fights quite well. He's inside fighting, so fighting up close is actually quite underrated. You know, he's quite physical. He uses the shoulder, and yeah, he sets up his shots quite well. Very Mike McCallum-esque, and of course that makes sense because I think his early amateur career he spent a lot of time with Mike McCallum. He's gone on record and spoken about that a lot, so he does have some craft on the inside. And of course, he's very offensively minded. But Chris Eubank Jr., I still think even under Roy Jones, he's maybe stagnating a little bit, whereas Conor Benn is on the up and up. So from a skills perspective, I like Conor Benn more, but the size, I can't ignore it. You know, I think if you see my videos, you guys know that I preach the importance of skill and technique and tactics, because it is essential, any sport, but especially boxing. But it gets to a point where the size difference is just too big, because when you're fighting someone who's bigger than you, or you're in the ring with someone who's bigger than you, your technique has to be so much better to overcome the size disadvantage. You know, that the height, the reach, the weight has to be so much better, and that's assuming that the opponent who's bigger than you is lesser skilled. Imagine being in with someone who's got just as good or better skills than you, and they've got the size advantage. Talk about uphill battle. But yeah, like if they were the same size, I'd probably favour Conor Benn, even though he still lacks experience. But if you're going for Conor Benn, hey man, don't let me stop you. You know, as Dwight says, just consider this to be the opinion of a complete stranger online. So I agree with Chris Andre that Conor seems to have the ability to break someone's construct or immediately have them flustered to forget their own tactics and plan. I think he'd make it a dirty, hard fight. Potentially, but that being said, if you look at Chris Eubank Jr., a lot of his best performances have come when the fight has been quite scrappy and quite dirty and rough. Because, as I say, he's a very physical fighter. You know, even in the fights that he lost, like the Billy Joe Saunders fight and the George Groves fight, he was soundly beaten in those fights. But when he had his most success was when the fight was its roughest, and it was, you know, kind of trench warfare stuff. That's what Chris Eubank Jr., I think he has like a natural kind of tendency or he thrives a bit more in that kind of environment. If it's a more of a slow paced, long range boxing where there's a bit more skill and a bit more thought and IQ, Eubank Jr. That's not his kind of fight. He likes to get stuck in and likes to let his shots flow. I know he kind of fights a bit more conservatively these days, but I don't buy it. I think it's surface level, and I think once he's in with someone who can uh, is formidable enough at long range, I think you're going to see Eubank Jr. probably fall apart a little bit and revert back to what he knows, which is that kind of up close trench warfare, rough stuff. Chris V, once again, hopefully it gets made. It'd be a fantastic fight, great for British boxing. Hopefully they could whack it on Sky. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it does have some kind of historical significance, but I think it's. I'm just moving. I think it's one of those fights where it's best where if it's left to brew a little bit. I'm not typically someone who says, "Oh, we have to wait and wait and wait for the right time," because sometimes the best time is now. Um, but I think this is one of those fights where it is best if it's just left for a little bit. Even at the bare minimum, just to let Conor Benn himself blossom a little bit more as a fighter, because he's still getting a lot of momentum, seems to be improving with every fight. So, yeah, I'd want just a couple more years, maybe. That's just my opinion, though. And as I say, if it got made tomorrow, I'd still watch it. TMT, how much of that is linked to the level of opposition? Okay, what do you mean? Are you talking about the difference between Eubank Jr. and Golovkin? If you could just specify what you mean, and I'll get back to you. Okay. All right. So yeah, we've got a few people in chat. 6 people. So good to have you here, guys. Spoken about Conor Benn and Eubank Jr. so far. Remember, this weekend we've still got Ryan Garcia versus Javier Fortuna. I was starting to doubt whether that fight was actually going to happen. At TMT, Benn's ability of breaking opponents' constructs and game plan. You know what? I think partially is linked to the level of opposition, because let's not beat around the bush. He hasn't been fighting the best at welterweight. But to be honest, I don't really diss him for doing that. It's early days. Conor Benn didn't have an extensive amateur career, which isn't always the be all and end all, but it can be a head start. He started off fighting a very appropriate level of opposition. Had a little bit of a stumbling block against Payno in the first fight, but since then he seems to have slowly but surely developed. And obviously, you have opponents or you have fighters where they can be at the highest level, but still have some pretty considerable weaknesses. But those guys at welterweight, they're pretty solid. So I imagine that. I mean, as it is, the way I see Conor Benn in his future, I don't think he wins a title at welterweight. I have to be honest. Given the landscape of things, assuming that Terence Crawford and Errol Spence move up, because I don't think I'd give Conor Benn even a 10% chance against those guys. They're just in a different stratosphere. So they move up, let's say. Who's left? You still have Jaron Ennis and Virgil Ortiz. And I don't favour Conor Benn against those guys either. So Conor Benn, he's got an uphill battle, in my opinion. And yeah, these guys, they've been boxing for a long time. They're just as, or they're bigger than Conor Benn. They're just as skilled, if not more skilled, than Conor Benn. So I don't think he's going to be able to threaten those guys as much. I don't think they're they're the kind of guys to deviate, because Conor Benn, it's tough to say because it's all theoretical when you think about it. I think a lot of what works in Conor Benn's favor is, I don't want to say his reputation, but his intensity. I think people, or the people, the fighters that he's fought thus far, they understand that once he's in range, he can really let his shots rip with both hands. And sometimes that kind of uh, that fear factor is enough to make you kind of break your own construct, just to use that terminology, because you're concerned about what's coming back, and you kind of sometimes go into panic mode. And I think that's kind of what happens when Benn fights these guys. They understand what he's going to bring, so as soon as he's in range, it's going to get painful. So um, yeah, I think it definitely it is linked to the level of opposition, just to say it in the most long-winded possible way. Mr. Relax. Benn's opponents have been picked very carefully for a reason. After he got away with a win from that French guy. Yeah, I think the first Payno fight, I had it a draw, um, if not Payno winning. But it was I think it was a 6-rounder. So those ones are always tough, because literally all you have to do is win 3 rounds, 3 rounds apiece, and it's a draw. Um, but yeah, oh man, that's like the best 6-rounder you ever see in your life. What a shootout! But he's come on a long way, because Benn really he he started his career thinking that he was just going to bowl everyone over. Just like, oh, I'm the son of Nigel Benn. I'm the Dark Destroyer 2.0, and I can punch hard. So I'm just going to land. And it's like, no, sometimes you're going to land on someone, he gets back up. Whereas now we're starting to see Conor Benn, and he's got the same intensity, but it's in controlled and channeled bursts, which you can. That's really the best thing, because you don't want it to be more of like an Anthony Joshua situation, where, and this is maybe not the best example, but I think it's a recent example where Anthony Joshua, not that he was a reckless fighter, but Anthony Joshua had a bit of a mean streak when he was starting his career. He wasn't afraid to let his shots go, and really, excuse me, guys. All right, I'm back. My neighbour's got a Harley Davidson, and he insists on revving that fucking thing outside my house. I don't know if that was coming through, but anyway, um, Anthony Joshua, yeah, early in his career, he wasn't afraid to really put a hurting on you and go for the kill. Whereas he had a couple of rough moments, kind of reinvented himself, focused more on skills, and since then he's lacked the intensity. Whereas with Conor Benn, he's not as not in not as an he's not in an advanced stage as Anthony Joshua is. Jeez, really struggling to speak. But he has a good balance of skill and intensity and ferocity. So yeah, his opponents have been picked carefully, but I don't want to say they're complete cherry picks. I think he's fighting a reasonable level of opposition. He can only fight this level of opposition for so long before he does have to be stepped up. But it's been gradual. I can't really poke too many holes in it, to be honest. Goruga, I think I pronounced that right. Benn was floored twice in the first round. Payno floored twice later. Yeah, see, that's a 6-rounder. So you got 2 knockdowns either way. It's going to be difficult to score. As I say, I had that fight a draw. But given that it was so early on in Benn's career, it was like, oh, I think on average, Payno is better than most fighters, like most journeyman fighters. But yeah, it was certainly alarm bells at first. Box Mines, hello, hello. Hearn knows Benn isn't ready for the real welterweights of the division. Pay-per-view beating from Eubank, low risk career-wise, maximum reward. Yeah, I suppose so. I can understand it from a marketing point of view, but I don't think that market value is going to go down unless one of them badly loses to someone else, and I can't really see that happening. Um, Obviously, there are instances where it potentially could happen, but I don't know. I just think it's like a stay in your lane kind of thing, especially from Eubank Jr. because this guy has been talking smack for years, constantly poking fun at other fighters, saying, "Why is he fighting him? Why is he fighting him?" But Eubank Jr. seems to be content on fighting welterweights. He Conor Benn, Kell Brook. What gives? I don't get it. I don't get it at all. And I gave Eubank credit for fighting Liam Williams because I said, look, he's calling out Eubank. He's calling out Canelo. He's calling out Triple G. I don't remember him calling out Andrade. So make of that what you will. But okay, if he's not getting a response from these guys, at least fight the guys who they've fought. And Liam Williams, of course, fought in Andrade. He gave him a tough fight Williams, and he did, and he dealt with Williams in pretty dominant fashion. But don't just go, okay, I fought Williams, now I'm going to call out Kell Brook, now I'm going to call out Conor Benn. No, why not go and fight the Japanese guy that Golovkin just fought? How have I forgotten his name? Oh, that's going to bug me now. I've just forgotten his name. But you know who I'm talking about. Fight Derevianchenko. Charlo, maybe? I don't know. Yeah, Jamal Charlo. Who knows? But yeah, Eubank Jr. Come on, man. Come on. That's I don't like that, in my opinion. I don't like it. TMT. I would gladly have someone explain to me how Benn defeats Eubank. Well, TMT, you should talk to Chris V then because he sounds like he's picking Benn quite confidently. Box Minds. Eubank Jr. should fight. Yeah, Ryota. Yeah, the Japanese guy or Liam Smith. Yeah, even those fights, those two fights, in my opinion, much more credible than Kell Brook, much more credible than Conor Benn. And I can't see why there'd be difficulty in making those fights, especially seeing as Liam Smith has gone over to Sky. And not to mention that it kind of is a bit of a full circle thing because Eubank Jr. has just beaten Liam Williams. Liam Smith beat Liam Williams. So, okay, have a battle of the guys who beat Williams. Makes sense. Maybe not the biggest, most competitive fights, who knows? But these are valid challengers. They're not welterweights. So, yeah, I just find it strange. And it's times like this when I really lose my patience with Eubank Jr. because he is an entertaining fighter. But it's just been so many years of him just talking rubbish and not backing it up. And it's frustrating, because like there are fighters and there have been fighters in recent years who talk a lot and they don't get a chance to prove it because they are genuinely avoided. With Eubank Jr., I don't think that's the case. He talks a lot, but I think I think he is aware deep down. I think he's aware of his shortcomings and he knows that certain fighters can beat him. I know he talks about the warrior code and this and that, but if you look at Eubank Jr. in his biggest fights, he freezes. So he's probably not as confident as he exudes. TMT, I remember how much hype Eubank Jr. had going into the Gross fight. He was one of the most talked about fighters in boxing back then. Yeah, he was. He was really starting to come into his own. Yeah, he had one defeat to Billy Joe Saunders, but he reinvented himself and he was throwing 100 punch combinations in every fight. And yeah, going into the Groves fight, Groves has always been like a bit of a glass cannon, quite vulnerable. So people saw it as Eubank Jr. A lot of people were not only picking Eubank Jr. to beat Groves, but wipe him out. They thought Groves was going to get absolutely battered from pillar to post. And look how that ended up. And people say, oh, the last round, the last round. That was a one-armed Groves. And even then, he was still getting off better in some of the exchanges. So, but you see Eubank and the way he performed in that fight, he completely froze. From the first round, this guy looked like his feet were in cement, or he had lead boots on because he froze. He didn't know what to do. And it was almost exactly as his performance, exactly the same as his performance against Billy Joe Saunders, because he kept having these little easy touch fights. Not all the time, but most of the time. He needed more development. But yeah, Eubank Jr. and as TMT, as you say, he's losing his entertaining style recently. Um, partially, I think it was. Yeah, I can understand what you mean. He's nowhere near as entertaining, in my opinion, as he used to be. But yeah, he seems to be quite reserved these days. He doesn't have that same all out. It's kind of like in bursts these days, it seems. Mr. Relax. I think Benn versus Eubank Jr. could be a low weight copy of Dubois versus Joyce. Okay. Who would be Dubois then and who would be Joyce? Because I'm not sure if I can see the resemblance. I'm not sure if I can see it. TMT. Eubank went from a star to be gradually forgotten. Yeah, kind of. Eubank Jr. has had a lot of inactivity in his career. And I think he could be in more fights if he was willing to fight certain people. Not to say that he's scared of people, but he's very inactive. I want to say, like, after the loss to Billy Joe Saunders, that fight was in November 2014. Come February 2015, he fought Chudinov. And yeah, Chudinov's not the greatest opponent, and this was Dmitry Chudinov, not Fedor. It was a good performance because he stopped him in like the 12th round, just did not stop his hand, like his combinations from round one onwards. And it was like, okay, Eubank Jr. is starting to get some good momentum, and didn't fight again until October 2015 when he fought Jetta. But I think, if I remember correctly, that was a late replacement. And even that, even if it wasn't a late replacement, it was supposed to be on the undercard of Kelbrook versus Diego Chavez, that was going to be a real good fight, but it didn't happen. And then in December of 2015, he fought Spike O'Sullivan, which was a wicked fight. I think people forget how good that fight was watching it live, because Eubank Jr. got buzzed early in that fight, and it was like, oh boy, like Eubank Jr. has got the quickness and the volume, whereas Spike O'Sullivan's got the heavy hands and the one-shot power. That was a good fight. Fought Nick Blackwell in 2016 in March, won the British title once again. Another blistering performance. Didn't have it all his own way, but for the most part, got through it. And it was what Eubank Jr. needed, because he was starting to fight these guys like Spike O'Sullivan, like Nick Blackwell. And yeah, that's not the highest level of opposition, but a lot of the time he was doing it in a hostile crowd, especially in the Blackwell fight. If you watch that fight, the crowd is just booing Eubank at every single moment, but he came through. That's a massive confidence boost. So he started to get a lot of momentum, and then went into the World Boxing Super Series, fought Yildirim, and then fought Groves, and then it seemed to just kind of fall apart after then. And as Boxmind says, the PBC deal didn't help at all, because did he have one fight? Was it one fight under the PBC deal? And that was the Korobov fight, which went 2 rounds, and then Korobov hurt his shoulder. And even then, early on in that fight, it looked like Eubank Jr. was going to have a nightmare, because Korobov, crafty Russian southpaw, it's a tough ask, especially with Eubank's skill set. So yeah, Eubank Jr. It's been less than stellar, I'll say that. TMT. I'm still laughing about the guy he fought that quit because of a shoulder injury, then immediately told Eubank he was ready for a bare knuckle. Yeah. Who was that? Was that JJ McDonough? Was that his name? The Irish guy, yeah. How can you quit a fight because you got a shoulder injury and then immediately offer the guy out for a straightener when he starts trash talking you? But yeah, that was some joke business. That, uh, yeah, entertaining nevertheless. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that was his name, JJ McDonough. And I don't think I've heard of him since because I think he had a fairly big win, didn't he? Like did he beat Jake Ball? I think that's what happened. Yeah, JJ McDonough, because he's a big guy as well. He looked like more of a light heavyweight. Yeah, I remember he sparked out Jake Ball in one round a couple years prior, and then yeah, he hasn't fought since the Eubank fight. That's interesting, very interesting. Whereas Eubank Jr., he's had 5 fights since that McDonough fight. Oh yeah, he fought James DeGale as well. I can't remember. Can't believe I forgot that. I actually went to that fight as well, but that was a washed up James DeGale. James DeGale was so poor in that fight. He was completely shot to bits. But Eubank Jr. did what he had to do. As I say, I was at that fight. I went to the O2 to watch it, and seeing James DeGale just get battered from pillar to post, it was kind of painful, because he was just every shot that landed clean just buzzed DeGale, and yeah, yeah. See, box minds. It just reminded me. Yeah, but that was a good undercard. That was like the first time I'd been to a major fight at the O2. Um, Good production and everything, but PBC did one show and didn't do anything else. TMT. PBC did not ruin Eubank. Eubank ruined himself. Still is. Yeah, I suppose it goes both ways, but I don't think the PBC deal helped because if you look at PBC, they do have a problem with their fighters being inactive for whatever reason. But maybe it's that whole cross the street thing. When you cut off other promotional entities, you're not going to be willing to make fights with them. That's all these potential fights that can't be made now because of your tribalism. So yeah, PBC didn't help, but then Eubank certainly didn't help himself. I think it's a bit of both. I meant more has Benn being the big punch coming forward, but Eubank Jr. is just excuse me, I'm not sure. I understand what you mean, but I'm not sure. I think Conor Benn is potentially, as I said earlier, the more skilled, but has the size disadvantage. Whereas Joe Joyce against Daniel Dubois was bigger and had a skill advantage. Like I was so confident that Joe Joyce was going to win that fight. I said it to my friend because that fight got postponed like 2 or 3 times, and each time I said no, like Joyce is going to win handily. I just did not see Daniel Dubois winning that fight, but obviously they're heavyweights, so this is a bit of a rabbit hole of an analogy that we're going down. Yeah, TMT. The girl was shot to bits. Like when a fighter's so shot that it makes you wince because you're just like, nah, man, call it a day. You shouldn't even be in this fight. Box Minds. It was the interview when Eubank told the girl he has his respect for taking those shots. The girl had a look of what you on about or what you're talking about. Yeah, that fight was just. I haven't watched it since. I didn't want to watch the replay. Watching it in person was bad enough. I was like, I don't need to see this again. And Gale did the right thing and just called it a day after that. But then Chris Eubank Jr., that was in February of 2019. Even then he didn't fight again till 10 months later, in December of 2019. that was a horrible fight which ended in the second round. So yeah, it is what it is with Eubank Jr. TMT. When you're that far bigger, you find yourself skills. Your physical domination makes everything easier. Oh yeah, of course. Like, size isn't everything, but size is something. It certainly plays a role. Like, at the bare minimum, a bigger guy than you can typically absorb your shots well. Not to say that, oh, he won't feel a thing, but the kind of shot that you floor someone with, like one punch, someone of a similar size to you, you floor them with one punch. That same one punch, you're going to need about 5 of them, uh, at least, if you're fighting someone bigger than you. Like, they still feel it, but it's not the same kind of crippling effect. Obviously, the weight differential is a thing. But then there are some other benefits, like generally, smaller fighters have a greater degree of mobility and agility and speed, but you really can't afford to get hit by someone who's massively bigger than you. It's not pleasant at all. Um, even sometimes, someone who's in the same weight class as you, but they're smaller stature, so they're a lot more of a denser build. They're shorter than you. They're probably not as broad as you, but they weigh the same. A lot of the time, those guys, it's uncomfortable to get hit by as well, because they're just so compact and so dense, and when they land, you feel it. It's like, boy, you're so small, but you weigh the same as me. So yeah, size does play a role, and it can change the dynamic of the fight. Being up against someone who's bigger than you and more skilled, can't think of anything worse. All right, so we've spoken about Benn a lot. What do you guys make of Ryan Garcia and Fortuna, but also the prospect of Deontay Wilder coming back against Robert Helenius? I think I've seen that is the name being mentioned. Regarding Ryan Garcia, he's another one. Talk about inactivity. How many times this guy pulled out of fights? I never thought this Fortuna fight would even happen, and I was going to touch on it earlier. I kept seeing articles about Garcia versus Fortuna this Saturday. Who wins? I'm thinking, wait, is this fight even happening? Because I even checked on BoxRec, and it wasn't even listed. It's listed now, but last week it wasn't there. A couple of days ago it wasn't there. I was thinking, damn, is Ryan Garcia that much of a flake? Is he that unreliable that not even BoxRec is gonna put the fight on the schedule? But looks like it's happening. TMT. Wish I knew more about Fortuna. How would you describe his style? He's a crafty, short southpaw, firstly, but he looks a bit crude at first, but when you actually see what he does, he's actually quite. He's got a good boxing brain. A little bit rough around the edges, but for the most part, I think he is actually the more skilled fighter when you compare him to Ryan Garcia. So I give him the skill advantage, but I think he's going to be quite a bit shorter. I think Fortuna is probably only like 5'7" tops, and for a small guy, he's not particularly quick, but he's quite fluid. He does something that I think is really a hallmark of a great fighter, and he has a very good movement quality and technique. So he's actually able to chain his slips and his rolls and his punches. So oftentimes he'll roll with a shot, come straight back with another shot, roll off, hit you with another shot with the other hand, and then roll off again. Like, he's very slippery. But like, if you watch the Jojo Diaz fight, there was a lot of that. And Jojo Diaz is a good fighter, a good solid fighter. But he's also he's a short southpaw too. So the dynamic kind of fit, if that makes sense, because Fortuna did a good job of kind of slotting his shots in, just sneaking them in as he's rolling, as he's slipping. You know, he's defensive, but he turns it into offense as well. But that's because, you know, he's fighting someone who's the same stance as him and a similar size. Whereas against Ryan Garcia, it's not going to be the same. So, however, I do think Fortuna moves around the ring a lot better than Ryan Garcia. And Ryan Garcia, he's not a skills guy. He's an athletic guy. He has some degree of skill. Like his counter left hook is smoking. You know, he'll clean you out with that because he's got good technique and he's got good timing and he um, understands which position he has to get you into to land it. But he's not very proactive, Ryan Garcia. You know, he does a little bit of feinting, but he doesn't really jab much. Um, you know, like in his last fight, he was fighting Tego, and Tego moved a lot and was quite negative. And Ryan Garcia, you know, tried to keep up with him. He cut off the ring fairly well, based on what I remember. But you know, he wasn't really using the lead hand much. He kind of relied on some foot feints, but his guard doesn't really change much. He kind of just had the left hand low, the right hand to the side of his cheek. Um, and I think that Fortuna might be able to catch him with that, especially if Fortuna uses the left hand as he goes to his right and goes outside the lead shoulder of Ryan Garcia. So I do think that Fortuna, like Boxmind says, is the better boxer. But I just don't think. I don't think Fortuna. I don't think his defense is consistent enough, and he's smaller. And Ryan Garcia is a big puncher, so I think Garcia will probably be down on the scorecards and may even get a stoppage late in the fight, maybe like 9 or 10. But Fortuna, he's a good fighter. He's a good fighter, but I just don't think he's good enough to really cement his victories, if that makes sense. TMT, I hope Fortuna causes Garcia nightmares and then maybe he'll wake him up. Yeah, Garcia's a weird one, man. He's just he's one of these guys where I think maybe he's just not cut out for boxing. And look, let me preface that by saying like, I don't have to say it to you guys because you guys are reasonable, but obviously it's relative. Like Garcia has achieved much more than I will ever achieve in boxing, but relative to his rivals, I don't think he's cut out for it. You know, I don't think he's got the dog in him. Um, at least outside of the ring, which is still important. You know, because outside the ring, you still have to deal with the pressure of being a high level fighter, the pressure of being a champion if you ever make it there. You know, if you look at his contemporaries, look at Haney. Haney's steadfast. Like this guy is so confident in his ability. He'll go to Australia. He'll go and fight the Australian fighter in a stadium full of tens of thousands of Australians. No problem. And he'll win. You look at Tank Davis. Tank Davis is a bit more of a street guy. So, you know, he's a bit more rough around the edges, probably buys into the bravado a bit more. But even then, Tank Davis is cold, man. He's cold-hearted, cold-blooded. Teofimo Lopez, I feel like his mentality has probably got some holes in it too. Who else there? Lomachenko. Lomachenko is just a machine. Like he doesn't care. No emotions, nothing. But then you have Ryan Garcia. Uh, you know, oh, I'm having struggles outside the ring, and you know, my mind it wasn't in the right place. And look, that stuff happens, but maybe you should save that for when your career is finished and you're selling your autobiographies, not when you're still an active fighter, when you're in against rivals who are your age, who are going to look and they're just going to sniff out any weakness they can. I think Ryan Garcia has made things a lot more difficult for himself by displaying the amount of weakness that he has. So, just my opinion. Who knows? Ryan Garcia may go on to be undisputed lightweight champion, but I doubt it. You know, I don't think he's good enough technically. Always has a puncher's chance, but even mentality-wise, you know, I don't think he's strong enough, steadfast enough. I don't want Garcia to follow Eubank's career path. Yeah, you know, Garcia had. I remember the days when nobody knew Garcia as an active fighter, and he already had millions of followers on Instagram. like this guy made it before he achieved anything in boxing. You know, from a financial point of view, a marketing point of view. Mr. Relax. Heleni is hard, man, but his defense is so bad. I can see why Wilder team would want him for a comeback. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a comeback, and you know, I think Wilder deserves it. You know, say what you want about Wilder, but in all of his losses, he's always given 100% in terms of heart. Like if you look at that second Fury fight, he got battered. He was completely shut out of the fight, and he had the fight. You know, just he didn't have the fight beaten out of him, but he would have had to be nailed to the canvas. So that's right. Mark Breland had to throw the towel in because Deontay Wilder would have carried on coming. He would just not stop. And he still went into that third fight with Fury, knowing that, you know, that could happen again. And he tried, and he still tried. So Deontay Wilder, man, say what you want about him, but his heart is probably, I think it's honestly unparalleled in the heavyweight division. This guy, he will go out on his shield. You're guaranteed that. So I think he deserves a comeback fight. You know, not an easy touch, but an easier touch in Helenius, who, let's be real, Helenius has got some momentum of his own, so there is some sense to it. But yeah, Helenius' defense is terrible, and like he's just so slow. But he fights that long range game, and that's Wilder's game where he just fastball that right hand. Garcia has a subpar long range despite his height. He just wants mid-range hook eventually. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, he is a mid-range hooker, but you know, he does set up his hook quite well. You know, he doesn't just throw it willy-nilly. If you look at the Fonseca knockout, which I know was a while ago, but he actually timed Fonseca coming in quite well. So he understands more of the subtleties and just throwing the left hook with good good technique. He understands the distance and the timing and where his opponent has to be, which position to really maximize the impact of the shot. Garcia has many similarities with Eubank, famous without doing much, all physicality, box office style. I see what you mean. Yeah, there's a lot of athletic potential there, but the skills are underdeveloped. I think against Luke Campbell, especially in the finish, Ryan Garcia was starting to show a good amount of misdirection and deceiving his opponents, which is quite it's a bit of a trademark of the Reynoso fighters like Canelo. But those are like boxing moves, you know. They work in isolation. Then they kind of, how can I say it? The only way I can describe it is like it's a move, you know. It's like a little trick you can pull out of the bag, and there is some principle to it, you know. Deceiving your opponent is one of the best things you can do in boxing. You know, it's fundamental. But I don't think they actually understand how to extrapolate that principle and apply it to boxing as a whole. They only know how to use that one move in isolation. That's Canelo's problem as well, for the most part. You know, he's got some skills, but if you look at Canelo, he really doesn't do that much, but he just has like a couple of tricks up his sleeve. And because he's a good puncher and he understands how to punch correctly, for the most part, he can damage you. And as soon as the damage, you know, accumulates, it's all downhill a lot of the time. I know it seems like I'm selling them like Reynoso fighters, especially Canelo short, but that's just what I see, you know. TM2, why there's some serious desire in that ring, you can't teach that. There you go. You know, I was listening to something yesterday and it really got me thinking. And I can't remember what it was exactly, but it's something like, you know, bravery is unreasonable. You know, that's where you don't become you're not a brave person by being reasonable. You know, you need to have a degree of almost delusion to be seriously, seriously brave. Because bravery, what is that? That is, showing your face to the challenge that you have virtually no chance of winning. And so any reasonable person would think, oh, my percentage of me being successful, the chance of me being successful is low. Therefore, I'm not going to take on this challenge. Whereas someone who's a bit separated from reality, they're going to say, okay, um, I have 0% chance of winning this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I want to see what happens. That's bravery. And that's what Wilder is like. He doesn't think about the damage that he's going to take. He just thinks, as long as I stick in there, I'm going to get you. And when I do, I'm going to be the winner. That's bravery. It's not the most sensible approach, but boy, sometimes, you know, bravery is enough to get you through in boxing. Sometimes. But yeah, you can't knock Wilder for that. All right. Jeez, we've gone for an hour already. So I believe all fighters are brave. It really comes to a question of desire. Do you want that, and how much do you want it? Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. It's you know, um, yeah. How badly do you want it? If you want it truly, truly want it enough, you do some insane things to be successful. But sometimes people, they don't want it enough, and they value other things. You know, um, I'm talking from experience as well in that case. Maybe one day I'll get into the ins and outs of it, but I stopped boxing a few years ago, actually, like nearly 5 years ago. And it really got down to the point where I was like, I just I just don't want it enough now. I value other things. So I'm gonna call it a day. Whereas a couple of years before that, when I was a teenager, I was like, nothing is gonna get in the way. Nothing could possibly deter me from um pursuing boxing and taking on every challenge I could in boxing. And yeah, like your mindset just shifts. And that really just goes to show that the mind, it 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 governs everything. The mind comes before it all. So yeah, if your desire isn't there, if you truly don't want it, and you're thinking about other things, just don't bother. Don't bother. It may come back one day. You might find that desire. It may come back to you, but if in this moment you don't have it, you don't have it. And if you're in against someone who does, it may not. It might not end up that well for you. Yeah, it takes an immense amount of bravery to get in the ring, regardless. You know, even these guys who have no intention of winning, you still have to go out there in front of loads of people and potentially take a beating. And all those people are going to judge you. And also, it's like if you look at it from the I don't know, like take going away from boxing and just thinking about combat as a whole. It's your strength against another man's, and obviously, as men, you have an ego, and that ego essentially governs almost your entire character, um, and your entire being. But then you get outstrengthed and beaten by someone else. Objectively, that man bested you. He is better than you in this instance. Does terrible things, man. That can really mess you up. Um, but if you win and you beat someone else, you're going to feel on top of the world. Especially if it's competitive. It's someone when it's an even matchup, or people are doubting you and you're an underdog, but you come out on top and you best that guy who everyone thought was going to kick your ass. You feel on top of the world. Frank Bruno won WBC on the fourth try. Yeah, yeah. Look, man, you might not. That's the thing about like losing. just because you lose doesn't necessarily mean you're a lesser fighter. A lot of factors can play a part in you losing. So that's like, it's a symptom of the kind of, I want to say, particularly the Mayweather era of marketing undefeated and, having a zero in your loss column. But losing isn't the be all and end all. Once again, it's taken on all challenges. If anything, that's what people, um, that's what resonates with people a lot, is fighters who at the highest level fight everyone. They don't shy away from the challenge. A lot of times people don't care whether you're undefeated or not. If you're someone who goes out there and says, I'll fight you, and you, bring it on, people like that, because that's what a hero does. um, they go out on their shield rather than ducking and diving and waiting for the right time. It's obviously it depends. Like, there are grey areas, but for the most part, if you're someone who keeps trying, like Frank Bruno did, and you display bravery, that's enough to win over the boxing public a lot of the time. Box minds, the most successful sports people, are also the most selfish. Yeah, you'll find that the best athletes, and even the most successful people in life, in business, in whatever, any endeavor, they have the biggest egos. And I'm sure there are like some psychological dynamics, but they 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 think in a way where they're like, you know what, I'm a chef, I'm a fighter, I'm a race car driver, I'm a businessman, and I'm not the best. You know, there are these guys who are way ahead of me, and they're the best at what they do. There's nothing like, why are they so much better than me that they can do it and I can't? That's the kind of thought process that these kind of people have. And they're like, you know what? Not only am I going to reach that level, but I'm going to surpass that level, and I'm going to be the absolute best. You know why? Because I'm special. That's the kind of the mindset that these people have, and it's admirable. But see, that's the thing. Like, not everyone is built like that. Some people are just modest, and they're just like, you know what? I've got my little spot. I've got my wage. I'm operating at the level I like. I don't need any more. But then some people, they need more, 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 more. They need more. It's not good enough. Every day they have to be better. And not only do they have to be better than their contemporaries, but they have to be better than themselves. It's almost like this: if they stagnate, they hate themselves. That kind of attitude, which, hey, it might be healthy, might be unhealthy, but people are just born different. Or people are built different, as the kids say these days. Adrian Remedy, thank you, my friend. It's good to have you here. Hope you can stay and talk boxing for a little bit. Thanks for your support as always, my friend. TMT, the social media era has made fighters and promoters and broadcasters afraid of defeat. Yeah, like, that's the thing. There's a trickle down effect, because obviously promoters now and broadcasters, they sell the fighter, which is the commodity, and because of like shifts in perception, that fighter, that commodity, is only a high quality commodity if it's undefeated. So it does play a role, but it's not the be all and end all at all. But there is like this mystique about being undefeated these days. And I don't want to put it all on Mayweather, but that's like, excuse me, that's the most recent example. It's always been around, because if you see someone who's had 20, 30, 40, however many fights, and they're fighting at championship level and they're undefeated, you think, wow, who is there that can beat this man? And, you know, like, when you're uh, realistically thinking about boxing, nobody's going to remain undefeated. For if you stay in an era for long enough, or maybe even pass into the next one, you're going to get defeated eventually. That's just how it works. No fighter is undefeated. And when you understand that no fighter is invincible, you stop seeing losses in the same way. But You have to have that thought process first. Drive, desire, and ego. When you have that, you have everything. I can understand what you mean. To be honest, I'm not sure if I'm well versed enough in life to agree or disagree. But I definitely think they are important things, especially ego. Ego is something that always gets treated negatively. Ego isn't an inherently bad thing. And out of an ego that's out of control, that's a bad thing. But ego, nah. The ego is what keeps you going, you know. The ego is what allows you to upgrade because you think, you know what, I'm better than this. I deserve better than this. And I'm going to pursue better than this. And before you know it, you're in a better place financially, achievement wise, knowledge wise, you know. So, but yeah, just my thoughts as a young man getting through this thing that we call life. So we've gone for an hour and 15 minutes. Probably go for another 5 minutes. So let's we've spoken about the main topics. TMT, I'm not versed in life philosophy at all. I just made that BS up. Hey, I think that's what philosophy is, you know, just say things and see how it sounds. um yeah. Anything else you guys want to talk about? What else is there? Let me see if any headlines have come through. Spoken about Benn Eubank, spoken about Garcia, um, Fortuna, Wilder briefly. I just hope that Wilder comes back, man. I miss watching that guy fight. So gangly and uncoordinated, but as soon as that right hand lands, or as soon as he throws that right hand, it's drama. Yeah. Boxing is a little bit dry right now, isn't it? I'll be keeping an eye on Garcia Fortuna though. I think that'll be a good fight. Bivol versus Zerdo. I haven't really seen much of Ramirez, to be honest, because I don't know. I just find that his fights are a little bit uninspired. You know, the opposition and stuff. I can't remember the last time I watched him. I think it must have been the Jesse Hart fight, or did he rematch Jesse Hart? I'm pretty sure he's had 2 fights with him, and they were good. You know, they were cool. But I'll definitely have to watch a bit more of Ramirez. But you know, this guy's 44-0 and has fought not very many people. Actually, you know, he's got some names, but no standouts. But I mean, it's a good fight. Would love to see Wilder back. I'd love to see, yeah, AJ versus Wilder. Like, that's the thing. Wilder's an entertaining fighter. He's such an interesting addition to the heavyweight division, which is already stacked. So there's so many great fights that he could be in. Wilder versus AJ, Wilder versus Usyk, Wilder versus Ruiz. I just hope that Ruiz beats Ortiz, not because I've got anything against Ortiz, but just because I don't want to see Wilder versus Ortiz 3. Could you imagine that? Oh gosh. Could you imagine Wilder versus Fury 4? Oh. So yeah, there's still plenty of interesting fights for Wilder to be in. But he's been a pro for a long time. But I don't think he's got that many miles on the clock, so I'd like to see him back. Chisora defense underrated at times, made Usyk and Pulev miss a lot of shots. Not sure how effective it will be with Wilder though. Oh man, I was saying to my friend a couple of days ago, whoever makes Chisora versus Wilder needs to be put away for manslaughter. I don't think Chisora should take that fight at all because, yeah, Wilder's coming off a loss, but as I say, I don't think he's nowhere near. I don't even think Wilder's shot, whereas Chisora, he's beyond shot, I think. And yeah, I think his defense is his defense can be underrated, but I think, you know, he just kind of stays in motion and he's a big guy and he pressures you. And when you're under pressure, you lose it a little bit. You're not as accurate. You kind of rush. But yeah, I don't think he stands up to Wilder at all. Um, Adrian Remedy. Yeah, we need that AJ Wilder shootout. Um, at this point, I don't know, have to see Wilder come back. But stylistically, I don't think Wilder's a good fight for AJ. Yeah. Interesting fight, though. Both guys could take each other out. A Freakin asks, do you think Wilder's power comes from technique or nature? He seems to lack any power with every other punch other than the right hand. I think it's both, to be honest, because if you look at Wilder's physique, he has the leverages that a lot of punchers have. Purely anecdotally, I've taken a lot of people on pads. I've worked with a lot of people, um, novices to intermediates, and the lanky guys, the tall guys who are thin and got long arms, long torso, long legs. They typically hit the hardest. Like two of the guys, and they were young guys as well. They were only like 15 or 16. I took them on pads. They wrecked my shoulders because the one punch power was just scary. It was, and these guys had no meat on their bones. One of them had almost like a dad bod physique where he had like these super skinny arms and like a kind of chubby torso, but he could crack. And to this day, him and his friend, who are both a similar build, as I say, um, they just had freakish power. And their technique was still a little bit rough around the edges because I'd only been coaching them for, I don't know, 2 months collectively. And Wilder has that. He's a very naturally explosive, naturally fast twitch athlete, but he does have good technique. Like it can be a little bit wild, very appropriate given his name's Wilder, but the principles, like he really rips his shots through, especially with that right hand. Um, and you find that most fighters just have a money punch, and that seems to be his. Um, they're you do get fighters like an Anthony Joshua, for example, who has very even power throughout his straight shots, his hooks, his uppercuts, and he throws them all very neatly. But he probably lacks that true one punch power that Wilder has. Um, yeah, Wilder's technique is very good. The only thing is, it's like a lot of the times it's 0 to 100. So if he misses, he may do himself some damage, and obviously he'd be wildly out of position. Hearn wouldn't think twice about making Wilder Chisora. Hey, if there are enough zeros at the end of the check, Hearn would probably go in with Wilder himself. So yeah, I think if that fight presents itself, Wilder Hearn won't hesitate. Okay, Adrian Chisora is tailor made for Wilder. That's a dangerous fight. Yeah, I'd be watching that fight through the gaps in my fingers. Iron Fist. Wilder's technique for the straight round is excellent. Also, at times, it very well, which can maximize the impact. Yeah, a lot of things go into the dynamics of a knockout punch, and Wilder has a lot of those dynamics down pat. So, I don't think AJ's chin holds up against Wilder. Yeah, probably. People say, "Oh, AJ got up from Klitschko's right hand." I don't. Klitschko's got a legendary right hand, but I think Wilder's is even more legendary. But on that same note, Wilder has to worry about a lot of shots come from AJ. AJ's got hooks, uppercuts. He's got his own straight right. Um, so, and Wilder's got a good chin, but I don't think he can take that many shots from AJ. Assume that AJ doesn't fight too conservatively. That Ortiz rematch KO was technically brilliant. Yeah, you couldn't ask for a better right hand, and even the way he set it up, using his lead hand to kind of herd Ortiz's head into the perfect position, blinded him momentarily, just chopped it in, and geez, just I'm sure the sweat that was knocked off of Ortiz's head, that must have gone into Rosette. Wilder does like a little jump. lands weight on his back foot, transfers all his weight forwards. It's very apparent in the Brazil KO. Yeah, yeah, that's like a typical like shuffle where you travel forward, but then shift your weight to the back leg. So then that becomes the power punch as you set up with the lead hand, boom, straight in. Just adds like it's a maneuver that adds like another layer of, uh, it's just how you set up your shots, basically, you know. Um, Many fighters can't do that though. That requires a lot of body control, a lot of strength, and yeah, Wilder does it well. You know, carries that forward momentum while loading your back leg or the back half of your stance to make sure that the right hand's a power punch. Um, Brazil KO is one of the best knockouts I've ever seen. Yeah, yeah, that was scary. Just completely cleaned him out. Brazil, Ortiz KOs, and Fury 3 knockdowns. Very well timed shots. Yeah, exactly. They're not just random shots that Wilder throws. He has such a high success rate with that right hand because he understands how to set it up. You know, um, there is some intelligence behind it, contrary to popular belief. Um, I think AJ has to get him early, otherwise Wilder will strike him down. Yeah, yeah. I think if you're AJ, you have to kind of go through the fire, and maybe as long as he just keeps his gloves up, you know, up inverted commas, and blocks that right hand as best he can, because I don't think it's a shot that you want to try and move away from. Um, like, you know, sometimes guys, they'll just move their head and their hands won't necessarily be in the right, you know, the most appropriate place, and they get caught anyway. But I don't think that's a shot you want to try and ride with. I think it's a shot that, yeah, you want to get out of the trajectory of it, but you also want to make sure your block is pretty steadfast. Wilder spots an opening very well. Not only does he spot an opening, but he creates an opening quite well. You know, you see that in the Ortiz fight in the rematch. If you watch the Fury rematch and trilogy fight, Wilder really did get tagged heavy, and although down a number of times, I still think he has a decent chin. Yeah, yeah, Wilder's got great heart, good chin, and amazing power. So it's always dangerous, always dangerous. Gorgoruga. Chisora defended himself well against the fast Usyk for a lot of the fight. What if Wilder can't land the right hand clean? Yeah, that's a good point. Although I do disagree that Usyk, I think he tagged Chisora plenty, but Chisora, he kind of moves with it a little bit and he present the top of his head and his forehead, but he's still there to be hit. And Deontay Wilder, you know, the forehead is a very hard part of the skull, um, which can absorb a bit more force than, you know, certainly the sides and even, you know, the chin. Obviously, that goes without saying. But Wilder, you don't want him hitting you upside the head at any part because the power is just freakish. And because Chisora these days is just so much slower coming in, I think he's just going to be a sitting duck, even if he is trying to move. I just think Wilder's speed is just going to still, assuming it's still there, I think it'll be too much. Um, yeah, look, Chisora's defense, I don't want to say it's that great, but it's maybe it's serviceable at times, but I don't think it serves him very well against Wilder. AJ could get in the pocket and unload on Wilder, but do you think he has the inside game to manhandle Wilder like Fury did? It depends, because with Wilder, he's got like that kind of, he wasn't really able to stand up to Fury, but Fury had, you know, a decent weight advantage. But with Wilder, when he gets excited, he gets these bursts of energy, and he's super strong. You know, like look at it's kind of like a bit of an aside, but in the second Stavern fight, do you see the way he ragdolled not only Stavern but also the referee? Wilder was just moving like an animal, and nothing could hold him down. And that's what happens when he gets amped. You know, he just gets this surge of energy, and he's just like, You know the film Crank or Crank 2, like those two films, but Crank 2 especially when Chelios has um, that heart that runs off the battery. You know, it's like um, an electronic heart, I guess. And then sometimes he connects himself to like some electricity mains, and he just gets his power surges. That's Wilder, you know, when he smells blood. But I imagine that AJ, even if AJ doesn't have the strength, he's still got the better work on the inside. So maybe he doesn't need it, you know. Because sometimes even if a guy has the strength up close, if you're savvy enough and you understand positioning and wrestling and stuff like that, you can work around it and still do some damage. With Joshua, it's really, is he confident enough to go to war with Wilder and bet everything? Exactly. Joshua seemed mighty timid in his recent fights. Still got some demons from his losses, it seems. Mr. Relax, would you like to see Chisora White free? Yeah, that's one of the few fights I'd like to see for both of those guys. Chisora versus White 3, I'd be happy with. White versus Ortiz, I think that's a decent fight. Maybe Chisora versus Ortiz, but I don't know about Chisora. But if Chisora's going to fight anyone, I'd be happy with the White third fight. Wilder is strong when he explodes, but he has to be in motion and it takes energy, not like Fury, who's strong even when he's standing still. Yeah, exactly. Wilder's strength is a bit more intermittent, whereas with Fury, he uses a lot of his weight. And even when Fury's wrestling, you see he's quite relaxed himself, but he's so tall and long and heavy that he's just on you like a blanket and he kind of drowns you out a little bit. Adrian, where do I see Joyce going next? So he's just fought Christian Hammer. I don't actually know. I think I heard some talk about Joyce fighting the winner of Michael Hunter versus Hughie Fury, I believe. Or no, that was Daniel Dubois, I think. But hey, I'd like to see Joyce fight those guys. If not, if obviously, you know, we all know that Fury's talking bollocks when he says he's retired. He's not retired. But for as long as he keeps up that act, I wouldn't mind seeing Joyce fight Anthony Joshua. Regardless if Anthony Joshua wins or loses against Usyk in the rematch, I'd like to see Joyce versus Joshua. I think stylistically, Joshua, like a lot of people are going to pick Joshua. Obviously, it depends on how he performs against Usyk, but I think there's enough familiarity there for that to be a good fight, an entertaining fight. And there seems to be a bit of a rivalry between these two. You know, they've always been quite close in terms of they've been around each other for many years. They're both of Nigerian descent, you know, Nigerian Brits, which, you know, I suppose it adds another thing to market. Yeah, I'd like to see Joyce fight like a real top level name now. He's just been hoovering up some of the names on the lower level, but time to get into the big time now with Joyce. TMT, where are we are going to have Wilder Ruiz soon enough if he defeats Ortiz. Yeah, as I said, I hope Ruiz beats Ortiz because I think that's a good fight. But we have to see how Ruiz performs because he seems to be losing a lot more weight. How's that going to affect him? Maybe he goes into the Ortiz fight and Ortiz just gives him that pimp hand left and flattens him. I doubt it, but you never know. Losing a large amount of weight can do strange things to your body. Gorgaruga. Fury retired nearly every year since 2016. Maybe. Certainly been it's been a bumpy road for Mr. Fury, hasn't it? Do you think Joshua can beat Joyce? Joshua can't hurt him and tempo's fast. Joyce has a chance. You know what? I don't know. But even if Joshua can't hurt Joyce, maybe he can hit him enough just to keep him at bay. Because obviously, if you're Joe Joyce or any fighter, even if you've got a great chin, if you're being punched in the face clean, that's going to stop you a lot of the time from getting off your own offense, because you're being hit in the face, you're being, heads being knocked around. And I think Joshua has the speed, and I think Joshua's stamina has improved. He's learned to manage it a bit better. But could you imagine if Joshua hits Joyce with his best shot, Joyce is still there? I suspect that Joshua may be able to put a dent in Joyce. We'll see though. Maybe Joyce comes out and he boxes a lot more and uses his movement, because Joyce can box. He can box and he can move well. He's a very underrated fighter, and he seems to fight to the level of his opposition as well. Joshua can outbox Joyce as long as he stays calm. Yeah, I mean, it depends what the pace is. Everyone can box 12 rounds if the pace is slow, but when the pace is, 10 up to 11, the saying is that fatigue makes cowards of us all, I think. Something like that. It's late, and we've gone on for an extra 10 minutes, but I'm going to call it a day here, folks, and get some food down me. So thank you to all you guys joining me once again in this fine Thursday night. Hope you've had as good a time as I have, and I'll see you in the next live stream, I suppose. So yeah, to all of you, have a great week, and take it easy, and I'll catch you next time. So yeah, take care, people, and I'll speak to you soon.